So we opened our National Cybersecurity Centre 2 weeks ago. The Queen came and opened it, which was a great honour for us. The National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK brings together 5 different institutions. So what we're trying to do is create a single point of contact for all cyber-related issues in the UK. So whether this is about getting access to threat information, design information, or responding to an incident, you come to a single place in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre, and we will manage that incident with you, help you design your system, or at worst, manage the harm that things cause. Any chance of slides? A little bit? We do want to be a slightly different sort of agency. So most national cybersecurity centres are very insular, they're very closed organisations. We announced last week something called the Industry 100. So over the next 2 years, we want to get 100 people from industry working inside the National Cybersecurity Centre. So that's 100 people from critical infrastructure providers, from big business, from SMEs and charities coming into the Cybersecurity Centre to help us tell them how to do cybersecurity, but more importantly, to get them to tell us how they work. Because if I'm trying to protect an electricity distribution grid with cybersecurity advice, I really need somebody who knows how to run an electricity distribution grid. We need to make sure that our advice is very tailored to the specific incidents and specific networks that we're trying to protect. I'm going to start by talking about aeroplanes. So, does anybody know why aeroplanes don't have square windows? So if you look around in life, every window you see is square apart from windows on aeroplanes. The reason for this is back in the 1950s, 3 de Havilland Comet 1s exploded in midair. That's a bad thing for an aeroplane to do. They found some wreckage, and they found that at the corners of the square windows there were diagonal stress fractures. And those stress fractures caused explosive decompression, killing everybody on board. And this is an interesting example for me of what you do when you have a fielded system with a vulnerability. Because now I've got every aeroplane at the time has square windows. I have a vulnerability in that system. If that was a cyber system, everybody would run around giving it a good name and panicking. What the aircraft industry did was take an entire de Havilland Comet 1 and put it in a tank and then fill the tank with water and drain it 1,500 times to simulate the cycle count of those aircraft. They causally proved that the square windows were the cause of the diagonal stress fractures. They then said, well, what are we going to do? Because every aeroplane has square windows. So instead of banning square windows on aeroplanes, they put some monitoring in place. They added some buttressing to the diagonals. They made sure that that system was safe, even though it had issues. That gives you, and then they changed the systemic design criteria and said, you cannot do square windows anymore on aeroplanes. If I had slides, you would now be looking at this lovely graph from 1970 to 2005, which tells you that over that time, the chance of you dying on an aeroplane has gone down. The chance of you being in an accident on an aeroplane has gone down significantly. Back in 1970, you were relatively likely to be in an accident and relatively unlikely to survive. By 2005, you were relatively unlikely to be in an accident, and if you were relatively likely to survive. That's systemic harm reduction. Right? That's managing harm instead of vulnerability, and that's what we think we need to change cybersecurity into. Ooh, now everything's broken. Not even I can see the slides now. Any chance, guys? So, what's the cyber equivalent of this? The cyber equivalent for me is buffer overflows. So, for those that don't know, buffer overflows are still the most prevalent cybersecurity issue. The first buffer overflow I can find as a public description of a security problem is in 1972. So, 1972, a US Army planning study showed, cheers. A US Army planning study showed buffer overflows to be, any chance of getting them on there? Yeah. Excuse me for 1 second. Can we put them up there?
We're trying our best.
Okay. So October 1972, computer planning study in America found buffer overflows. The interesting thing for me is that October 2014, the heartbleed bug that was talked around as though it was the end of the internet was exactly the same software defect. Exactly the same. And so for 42 years, we've lived with a systemic vulnerability and not managed to fix it. And that shows me that we're doing harm management wrong. And so we need to change how we do cybersecurity to address harm instead of vulnerability. That's what I was going to say next. One of the problems we have is the way you talk about something changes how people perceive risk. So the 2008 financial crisis was caused by 5 financial instruments. The first one was called mortgage-backed securities, and that sounds really, really secure. It has the word secure in it, and it's backed by a mortgage. The second one was called collateralized debt obligations. And again, that sounds really good because there's still an obligation on the debt. The third one was called credit default swaps, and that's starting to sound a bit more risky. The fourth one was called subprime debt, and the fifth one was called toxic debt. You could be forgiven for investing in mortgage-backed securities. You would be an idiot to invest in toxic debt. And yet they are all exactly the same thing. The way we talk about things changes how people perceive risk. And so, if you go again to the cybersecurity realm, we talk about things as advanced persistent threats. Everything we see is an advanced persistent threat. The security industry, we allow the security industry to talk about every single attack as though it were performed by an advanced persistent threat. In our experience, there are very few advanced persistent threats. In terms of technical capability, many, many, many of the attacks that we see are actually very basic. And so a lot of the attackers that we see are able to achieve their goals without really trying that hard. They may have a very high impact. We had some great examples in the UK this year. For example, one of our big telcos that provides residential broadband had a massive data breach. That data breach was through a SQL injection bug. SQL injection bugs are about 20 years old. They've been around for about 20 years. The attacker that performed this breach was 15 years old. When the vulnerability is older than the attacker, we can't call it a sophisticated, advanced, persistent threat. And yet that was how the media portrayed it. So we have to be much more honest about how we speak about cybersecurity. We have to be much more honest about the impact and the technical capability of our attackers. Cybersecurity today effectively runs on fear. The entire industry, including governments sometimes, cause fear in people. They make them fearful so that they do something. And generally speaking, fear is very bad for proper risk management. We want people to really understand the risks they're taking so they can make well-informed decisions. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer last year, came to GCHQ and made a speech. And one of the things he said, I'm going to have to read this out, excuse me, the most fundamental thing we need to do is to defend ourselves online, and we are developing a series of measures to do so more actively. Those measures are codified in the new National Cybersecurity Strategy, which was published in November. For a government strategy, it's actually quite a good read. It's 80 pages, and it goes across the entire waterfront of cybersecurity, from skills and education, through to technical defenses, through to shaping the environment and market, through to our offensive cyber use with our military. And my colleague, Conrad Prince, the cyber ambassador, will talk more about some of that tomorrow. I'm going to concentrate on our active defense program today. Before I do, I want to talk about 2 pieces of advice that the cybersecurity community gives people that I think aren't very good. So the first piece of advice we give to people is have a different complex password for every service you use and change it often. Okay? And intuitively, that feels like a good thing to do. So we've actually done some fundamental research underneath the use of passwords and how people remember them. That piece of advice is broadly the same as saying to people, please remember a different 600-digit number every month. Right? Nobody can do that. And if people can't do it, the advice is bad. So we've published recently on our website some new advice about how to manage passwords better, how to manage authentication better. And we've got to the point where we've done this really nice infographic, a very simple thing that anybody can understand. They understand how passwords are breached and what to do about it. And we've had people take that to their CIOs of their organizations to say, why are you making me change my password every 30 days? Because people have a fixed security budget and we're wasting it at the moment. We should be asking them to do things that make a difference, not things that sound good. The other thing that we often tell people is never open an attachment or click a link in an email unless you trust the email. Who's been told that? Everybody has been told that piece of advice. It's really, really silly advice. How do you determine trust in an email? The only way I know to do that is to read the internet headers. And I reckon I can do that about 95% of the time and get it right. I am sure that the 62 million people in the UK cannot do that reliably. And so again, we're asking people to do something that we do not give them the information for. We do not allow them to do that in a sensible way. And that makes it much, much easier for attackers to subvert the trust in things like email and do their nefarious work. So, one of the first things that we want to do under our active defense program is use something called DMARC. So DMARC is an internet protocol that's been around for years. It allows the owner of a domain to write policy that says, here is how email from my domain should behave. And so one of the things I can do is say, my email only ever comes from these IP addresses and will always be signed by these keys. And if it's not, don't deliver it to the end user. Deliver it back to me so I can see somebody's trying to spoof my domain. So we did some experiments and we turned on a DMARC record for gov.uk because nobody should ever send email from @gov.uk. It should always be @department.gov.uk. On the first day, I got 58,000 spoofed emails, all from taxrefund@gov.uk. On the second day, I got 58,000 spoofed emails. On the third day, I got 4. Not 4,000, 4. On the fourth day, I got another 50,000, and since then I have had 0. And so the guy who was spoofing taxrefund.gov.uk has gone somewhere else because he's not getting a reward from it now. So part of the thing that we want to do is make email mean something again. So by taking control of our domains, making sure that they cannot be spoofed, we start to do something very interesting. HMRC, which is the most spoofed brand in the UK, which is the tax office in the UK, recently turned on their DMARC record. And again, setting it so that those emails were not delivered to the end users, they were delivered back to us. That piece of work has already stopped 300 million spoofed emails. And over the next year, we expect it would stop another 500 million. So 500 million spoofed emails don't get delivered. And so that advice of don't click a link unless you trust the email should be, I want to get it to, if you get an email in your inbox, you will get really high quality information to help you make decisions. Because remember, most cyber attacks that we see start with an email. Most cyber attacks that we see, whether they are phishing, credential stealing, nation states, most of them start with an email. If we can make email mean something again, we can make the attacker's job harder. So by the end of this year, we will have every single one of the 5,700 UK government domains protected by DMARC. Once we've done that, the idea is to go to all of the big industry in the UK who have a public presence and say to them, you should do the same. You absolutely should do the same. If government can do it, then surely industry can do it as well. And so we're using government as a guinea pig to make sure that the technical measures we want to put in place work, they scale, and that they have an effect that we can measure. One of the things we've done as part of that work is write a piece of software that processes all of those spoofed mails and automatically pulls out the mail server, the attachments, any links that are there, follows them, and manages to get hold of any malware, command and control, phishing sites, etc. And they get fed into a centralized system, which I'll talk about in a minute. We've open sourced that piece of software. So we've published it for free. It's on GitHub if anybody's interested. It's called MailCheck, and it's very, very simple. It runs in Amazon AWS, so it doesn't cost much to run. In fact, we've been processing domains, we've been processing about 300 domains across government for the last couple of months We still haven't managed to get out of the Amazon free tier. It's very, very lightweight code, which means that even small entities will be able to use it. We've also been doing some experiments around malicious websites and malware command and control. So we've done 3 different things. The first thing is going after any phishing which is physically hosted in the UK. The second thing is to go after any web inject malware which is physically hosted in the UK. And the third thing is to go after any UK government branded phishing anywhere in the world. Let me give you some numbers. So the numbers are interesting. So for phishing in the UK, physically hosted in the UK, before we started, the median uptime, so the average time a phishing site was around to do harm, was 27 hours. Today, it's 1 hour. So if you launch a phishing attack hosted in the UK, you have less than an hour before we're going to take it down, which means your return on that investment is quite low. For web inject malware in the UK, physically hosted in the UK, it used to be 525 hours. So that's 5 days. It's now, no it's not, it's 20 days, sorry. It's now 2 days. So again, if you're hosting something like that in the UK, it's not going to be there for very long. It will not be around very long to do anybody harm. And then the final one is phishing branded as UK government. Any UK government brand has gone from 45 hours to 5. And so these are good numbers to have. They show us that we can have an effect with some really, really simple techniques. The techniques that we're using for that are emailing the hosting providers. Right, so this isn't very, very advanced cyber ninjery. This is, dear hosting provider, you are hosting something pretending to be UK government, please take it down. Right? And once you get to a rhythm of this, you can start to do it in a completely automated way. So that system is now totally automated. The next big piece of work we're doing is around recursive DNS. So all cyber attacks at some point will use DNS. For those that don't know, DNS is the phone book of the internet. It translates names into IP addresses. At some point, every cyber attack will use DNS. And the thing that we've thought about is if we ran a single DNS for all of public sector in the UK, what could we do? What's really interesting is it scales really well. So we have built now a single DNS infrastructure for all of public sector. So that's central government, local government, health, education. And we're starting to onboard people now. The point of this is as soon as I know something's bad, I can stop access to it. I can change the way the DNS works and say, actually, if you click on this phishing link, it doesn't matter. You're not going to go to the attack site. You're going to go to a site that we run that says, hey, you clicked on a phishing link. Tell me how you got there. Tell me what happened to make you click the link. If you've already got malware installed on your machine and it's trying to beacon out to its command and control server, again, we can sinkhole that at a massively scalable way. We think that through doing DNS for public sector, we'll be able to massively reduce the risk of harm across public sector. And again, using public sector as an example to show how it helps. The great thing about DNS system is it generates data. So I get lots and lots and lots of data from that system. I will know which departments are infected, which areas of the country are infected, with what sort of things, what sort of harm we are reducing. So if we can say, for example, Zbot was not installed 25 times in the tax ministry because of this DNS, that gives me some numbers to work with, and I can then start to translate that into harm reduction, real harm reduction. If we then take that and we do some analytics on that back end, we can start to find some really interesting things. So some of the experiments we've done so far with the analytics for the DNS are things like, can I spot a DDoS before it happens? And it turns out you can. So through working with DNS, we can spot the ramp up to a DDoS about a day before it happens. Can we spot new malware command and control being registered and tested before the attacks get launched? Turns out you can. And so as those analytics start to progress and mature, we'll have more and more interesting outputs from that DNS system. What we're going to do with that is build a single repository for our threat data that will feed across all of our different active defense measures. And again, if I had slides, I'd show you a lovely picture of all the different things we're doing. It's actually on the NCSC website. So if you go to www.ncsc.gov.uk, there's a blog written by me that describes the active defense measures. I think it's worth a read. Once we've done that for government and we've proved that it's useful, we take that threat data and we give it to others. So we're already working with the big ISPs in the UK to say, actually, ISPs, it's not okay for your customers to harm themselves unknowingly. So if you are a residential broadband customer in the UK, by default, some point this year, you will have a filtered DNS system. So you will not be able to go to phishing sites. Your machine will not be able to go to malware command and control by default. If you want to opt out of that protection, that's absolutely fine, that's your choice. But most people won't understand, and so will just be protected by default. And again, that's with the ISPs doing that rather than us. We'll give them the data. They can give us statistics back. All I want to know is what effect are we having on the national threat picture. Some of the other interesting things we're doing, we think we can make it much, much harder for the UK to participate in a distributed denial of service. So we're doing some work with BGP, which is the Internetwork Routing Protocol, and we're saying things like, it shouldn't be okay for a UK machine to be able to spoof an IP address. And if you can't spoof an IP address, doing layer 3 DDoS is much, much harder. And so we're working with the ISPs again. We're writing a standard that we will then trial in the UK to make the UK participating in a DDoS much harder. The idea then is we'll go to the other internet exchanges and go, hey, guys, we've written this. If you implement this, it makes DDoS much, much harder globally. From a UK point of view, I need links in London. I need Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and New York to implement the standard, and I'm done. DDoS is not a requirement of an internet. It's because we allow the telcos to do things that really they shouldn't. It shouldn't be okay for a national telco to transit bad traffic, and yet we allow it today. We're going to try and stop that. Some of the other things we're doing, we are automatically scanning every single gov.uk website once a week. So we've changed the namespace agreement on gov.uk to say, if you have a gov.uk name, we're going to scan it. We're not going to tell you when we're going to do it. We're not going to tell you how we're going to do it. We're just going to do it. In the first alpha of this product, we found 5 vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities in government websites, and a 0-day in a particular cloud hosting environment, all from an automated tool. And again, once that's built, we intend to open source it. In all of this, we want to have a measurable effect. We want to generate data and generate evidence that we can publish. Because today, cybersecurity, as I say, is driven by fear. We want to change cybersecurity to be a science, to drive it by data, have evidence-driven policy and evidence-driven investment. That evidence-based analysis needs to be public. We need to be able to put stuff out there that helps the public make good decisions. There's lots and lots of examples in the health sector where there are statisticians who've worked very, very hard to help translate very complicated health statistics into infographics and information that the general public can understand. I want the NCSC in the UK to do exactly the same thing for cybersecurity, to take a complicated technical science and turn it into something that anybody in the UK can understand and anybody in the UK can make good decisions about. And finally, we want to be a very transparent organisation. So we're talking about everything we do in public. I don't think my adversaries are going to get any benefit from knowing that we're running a DNS service, because in a week, when they try and attack me, they'll notice. Right? If they want to test against my public sector DNS service, if anybody wants to test it, the IP address is 25.25.25.25. There is an ACL on it today, but one of the things that I intend to do is allow that to be publicly used. And if my attackers want to test against it, that's great, because my analytics will pick it up. I can block their attacks before they even launch it. So, to wrap up, the UK's NCSC intends to be a single point of interaction with anybody in the UK, be it citizen, be it SME, charity, big business, critical infrastructure or government. We intend to do things differently, very differently to the traditional cybersecurity way of doing things. We intend to do it in an evidence-based, generate science, build metrics, and publish them all. And on that, thank you very much, and I will take any questions if there are any. Anybody have a question? Oh, there's one at the back there. Is there a mic?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Professor Arwa Al-A'ma. I am from Jeddah municipality. I would like to thank you first of all for this great opportunity and for sharing your experience. I also would like to thank the National Cybersecurity Center in Saudi Arabia for hosting this very important event. My question is, unfortunately, the UK IP addresses is one of the major targeting addresses to the Saudi government. I work in a Saudi agency, and we have a lot of IP addresses from the UK that are targeting our environment. My question is, you have protected yourself very well. Is there any chance that you're going to be protecting other countries from people using your IP addresses to attack us? And that's question number one. Question number two, maybe I'm addressing this question to our National Cybersecurity Center. Are we really using something such as the great technology that you have spoke about and protecting Saudi government agencies from the spoofing? I forgot the name of the free tool you published. Mailcheck.
Mailcheck.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
So I'll answer the first question. Yes, absolutely. What we want to try and do is build a reporting point. So if there is abuse coming from the UK, we want to try and simplify at the moment you have to go to 2 or 3 different companies, one the name hoster, the actual hoster, any upstream provider if they're not responsive. We want to try and simplify that. So we're trying to do that first with government and saying, can we have a single portal for vulnerabilities in government stuff? And then if that works, and it works well, we'll extend out to saying, look, if you have a problem with a UK-based IP, send it here and we'll go and investigate. So absolutely. In terms of how other countries can protect themselves, we're publishing everything we do. So everything we do, we will open source, we will publish the standards. If other countries want to adopt that, that would be great. I can't speak for the Saudi National Cybersecurity Center. I don't know if anybody wants to.
Dr. Salih Al-Mutayri from National Cybersecurity Center. First, I'd like to thank you for these questions. And as I mentioned in my my speech, we in Saudi Arabia, we did the first part or the first phase of situation awareness and building some capability in the phase 1. And since the center is just opened like last week, we plan for 2017 to implement all these active defense measures. So they are in the plan for 2017, inshallah. Thank you.
So.
Abdurrahman Mayegal, Saudi Aramco. Thank you for your excellent speech. Now, you made it very easy talking about DMARC, because I know there is some complexity in having everybody using DMARC, especially also like SPF.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your experience? I know you just opened maybe 2 weeks ago, but what's your experience in spreading this knowledge within the UK?
So you're absolutely right. There are some complexities in DMARC and SPF and DKIM, the 2 other protocols underpinning it. We've been pushing DMARC for about 2 years now. So about 2 years ago, we published a government standard about email security, which talked about DMARC and TLS transit, those sorts of things. When we started, government had 0.04% of the domains DMARC compliant. It's now at about 9%. So it's still not great, but it's on the right track. By publishing tools to help people do things and publishing tools to do the processing, we think that will help adoption. One of the things that it did throw up in the early days were there's some key infrastructure in the UK which broke SPF or DKIM and therefore broke DMARC. What we found is that one company going and saying, Mr. ISP, you should fix this, doesn't work. Government going, oh, Mr. ISP, you should fix it, really does. And so as part of getting a government adoption first, we can iron out those wrinkles so that adoption's much, much easier for everybody else. Okay. There was a question over here, I think.
Thank you for the presentation. You have successfully managed to have a central DNS for the public sector.
Yep.
Are you planning to have or to centralize other technologies other than DNS, like for example, email server or public internet browsing for the public sector or other sectors? Because this technology may not be scalable enough,
Right.
okay, like DNS.
So it's a great question. So just for clarity, our DNS is being run by Nominet, who's the UK registry. So they have 25 years of experience of running national scale DNS. So running one for public sector is easy for them. So we're not trying to do it ourselves. We've got somebody really competent to do it. Other technologies we're thinking about, so email probably not, because the complexity of UK government's just too great. One of the things we are thinking about is a centralized proxy service. So if, for example, you're a small local authority and your IT department is one guy part-time, you're still on Windows XP, there's nothing you can do about that because you don't have the money. What we're thinking about is, could we become their ISP? So we become their upstream ISP and basically filter all the bad stuff for them. That's something we're thinking about. We're not quite sure how the scaling function works. We're not sure about the privacy issues. We're not sure about adoption issues. But certainly there are a set of things in our active cyber defense program over the next few years that we are thinking about providing centralized services like that. One last question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, last week we've seen British Telecom announce their partnership with Symantec and providing Clean Pipe, a service to their business customers. My question is, are they having the green light from the UK government in intercepting the encrypted traffic? I mean, some of the traffic are encrypted.
Right.
I mean, some of the malwares can go through tunnel of encrypted traffic. So how they are dealing with the encrypted traffic?
So
my question is, do they have the green light to intercept
No.
the encrypted traffic, clean it up, then provide the clean pipe to the customers?
I doubt they'd have the technology to do it either. So breaking encryption's hard. It's really, really hard. Breaking it at scale is incredibly hard. You're absolutely right. There's lots and lots of malware out there that uses encrypted tunnels to try and hide, look like SSL tunnels, those sorts of things. In the end, still has to talk back to a command and control server. Generally speaking, there are two things you're going to see. You're either going to see a DNS query, which you can sinkhole, or you're going to see connection to an IP address with no associated lookup. Both of those are interesting triggers. And so you don't have to break the encryption to know something's bad. And certainly, I don't believe BT are breaking encryption on any product. We wouldn't be entirely happy with that, to be honest. But on that, thank you all very much for your attention. Again, thank you for the honor in speaking to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.